Hello, this is Catholic Mom, and today we welcome Eric Wilson, and we're going to be speaking about his newest book, Samson. He's also written some books you'll be familiar with, but I'm going to let him take that, and I'm going to do this podcast just for you. So, Eric, we're so glad to meet you, and welcome to Catholic Mom Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So I know the audience have heard of you, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, as of the moment, I am married of 27 years. I have two children who are grown, two daughters, two grandkids, which are awesome. But I started off as a baby myself, as you can imagine, and grew up in a family of three, with a brother and sister. I was the oldest, and we traveled doing missionary work when I was a little boy. My parents were involved smuggling Bibles in Eastern Europe, and we were in Asia, a couple different places. So early on in my life, I just had a lot of cultures and sounds and sights and foods and all kinds of things that sparked my imagination. And so here I am, stuck writing books.
I saw a writer myself, and those Catholic mom writers are going to appreciate this interview so much. You make such a difference in this world. Two of my favorite movies, because I'm not much of a movie goer, but I like the Christian movies like Fireproof and Facing the Giants. We thank you for doing those. What inspired you now to do Samson? This is your newest one.
Well, the way the process works is they have a screenplay, and they come to me and say, we would like you to fill this out into a full novel. So in this case, for example, the screenplay was 15,000 words. And, you have the bare bones of a script. As a novel writer, a script looks very stripped down and almost boring to me. I really have to fill in. And that's what a director does when they film a movie. But I'm getting to take it and turn it into a novel. And it was 75,000 words. So I basically added 60,000 words, fleshing out characters, backstories, putting in other characters, and also adding some different subplots and stuff. And ultimately, the original writers or the screenplay writer had the say to tell me, no, you can't do that, or you can, but they let me do everything I wanted to do. So it was a fun process.
Well, I'm so excited. I think it's amazing. I just keep thinking in my mind that song Imagination that comes at Disney, because we're down here in Florida vacationing. But I think it takes a great creative spirit to do such a thing. And when you did the two movies I have seen, Fireproof and Facing the Giant, it made it so come alive for people. It's helped so many people. So I want to thank you on behalf of those who watch what you do. And so will it be a movie?
I mean, it will come out February 16th, I believe, is the release date. In fact, if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see just yesterday I was at the movie theater, and they had the Samson, a kind of big display with Samson's body and the face cut out. So I put my face in there and took a picture, and I don't look at all like Samson. I don't have that physique, but it was fun doing it.
I'm so excited. I really am. I like Christian movies. I just think it's something you can bring your children to, and then your grandchildren. We have 12. So I was going to ask you another question. I read Samson today again because I know I love the Word of God, and I was reading about him saying that it's a very short amount of material. But what made you come up with in Samson? What were you intrigued about? What was your most important point that you think, I know about his strength? There was so many angles. There was Delilah and what she did. Your wife could be your helpmate or your hindrance. So yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, there was a couple things that stood out to me. I did the same thing as you did. I reread those 4 chapters. It's really not much, but there's a lot involved. And as I read it, I thought, most people in life don't make the kind of bad choices Samson made without little compromises happening along the way. I've seen people in my own life who made some pretty bad choices, but you could see, looking back, little areas where they started to compromise. And so I wanted to fill in those gaps in Samson's story and kind of flesh it out where he would feel like a real life and blood person to us, not just somebody who went from a heroic battle to a really stupid mistake, these kind of things. Because in life, it doesn't usually work that way. There's all the days in between. So I wanted to make sure to flesh him out and make him feel like a real person that we could relate to even 3,000 years later, and learn the good and bad. He did both. He did a lot of bad and he did a lot of good, and God worked through him despite that. So to me, that was really the biggest lesson, is that God can work through us despite our and our weaknesses, but to also be aware of what our mistakes and weaknesses are so that we don't make those little steps that lead to the big horrendous mistakes. Hopefully we learn.
I think it's such a great teaching point, especially for parents nowadays. I remember I had so many children that I remember thinking, well, that's just, a little thing, but little seeds of, fault or vice grow into big trees of character. So that's excellent. I really, really think that's important. I like the fact that he's strong. I go, he's the first bodybuilder, in the Bible. He's like really strong, but he wasn't strong enough to resist the temptation of a woman. And so I don't know if you did you bring that out in his, in the movie of saying that, I know you said the small things led up to big things, but if I were Samson or you were Samson, what would you have done differently?
Well, definitely I did explore that. That's a big part of the story. The part that most people know, the Samson Delilah part and his strength. I took a little different angle than I think I've seen done before with Delilah, especially with the Me Too movement going right now, which is really something that's been around since the beginning of time. We've always had this issue. Excuse me. I wanted to take more the angle that Delilah herself was a pretty wounded person and had stuff that happened to her that made her make some bad decisions. Not that abuse that could happen to a woman or a man, but not that excuses your behavior, but it does tend to lead to certain patterns and choices and rough decisions in your life and feelings of being used or abandoned or manipulated. And so I think Delilah, it's very likely that those were issues she dealt with that made her become kind of a manipulator in Samson's life and for her own survival with the Philistines. So to me, that was one angle I wanted to make sure to bring out, is that she wasn't just this villainous, that women are bad and a temptress, but that she is a person dealing with something. And Samson was fully responsible for his mistakes. He couldn't blame it on someone else, leading him down this path. But as a man, definitely, I would hope I would not be dumb enough to have somebody, keep trying to find out my secret and keep, being attacked by Philistines and beating them off, and then having her try the same trick again. I mean, when you read it in the story, you're like, how could he be so dumb that the third time around or fourth time around, he finally tells her the real truth, that his strength is in his hair, which I don't think it truly was his strength was in his hair, but in his obedience to God and not cutting that. So, hopefully I would not be that dumb, but we've watched many men in power, even in the last generation, make those kind of mistakes where you're like, how could they be so dumb to get caught in that situation or put themselves in that situation? So, hopefully we just make smart decisions. And I think a lot of it has to do with truly respecting women as an equal and as a partner and as God's daughters. And, that was my approach before I got married, was thinking, how would God want me to treat his daughter when I'm dating this girl? All of us hate to meet the dad. You go on a date, you're like, oh no, I got to meet the dad. That's scary. But what if you face the reality that God is the dad of every woman out there? So what if you had to go face God as the father of this girl that you took out on a date, and how did you treat her? So to me, that was one way that, when you really grasp that can be a pretty powerful thing when you're putting yourself in situations that could be tempting to remember, she has a dad and he's even watching right now.
It's true. I think it is a great answer. I think that's very important to respect women, but I think it was like you said. I think he got whittled down. 3 times. The first time he's really strong, and for our children out there to be, avoid the near occasion. Like if you see this person, there'd be 2 great people, and one's brings temptation on you. I think that's important, and I think it's not only a pretty face. Delilah was very beautiful. It's a pretty heart. So I think you were formed very well. So what would you say that someone out there, why they would want to read the book of Samson? Why would they think this is a great read or see the movie?
Well, one of the things that really jumped out at me that I hadn't thought about too much was the fact that Samson's parents were given such a strong word of God that they were going to raise this child who would, help deliver their people. And so as a parent, that jumped out at me in a new way from being a kid and reading that story. My own kids and in some of the mistakes they've made, and how you as a parent want to believe that God has something planned for your children and is going to do good things in their lives, and hopefully as a parent you can help be a part of that. But they have to make their own choices. And Samson's parents had to watch him make decisions, even marrying a Philistine woman, that were not at all what they would have agreed with. And how did they come to terms with that when God had given them such a clear direction for their child? So as you read the book, I think you can learn from his mistakes. You can learn how to think ahead a little better, but also as a parent to be encouraged that even when your children are sometimes going off on a path that doesn't seem right to you, sometimes God may have a different plan than you think, or sometimes they are disobeying God, but he's still at work and he can find a way to get them back path that he really wants them on. So not to give up. So that was actually a big encouragement to me, reading and writing the story of Samson.
I think it's so important. I'm a mommy mentor, and I tell women it's so important to let them have so much freedom that they make their choices, and so much rein that you can pull back. And then when they get adults, you have a little bit harder time of like how much input you give. So I would say this, Samson to me was more than just strong. He really did know the Lord young, and I think, what could you say to parents about this, about forming them in the Lord? Because you were formed well in the Lord.
Yeah. My parents, it sounds like you were similar. They definitely gave us freedom. My mom would constantly, I would go to my mom from the time I was 3 or 4 years old until she died in 2008. And I would ask her, what do you think God would want me to do in this situation? And some of these were like loaded questions where, say you're 16 years old and you ask, Mom, do you think God would want me to go to this school dance where they're going to be drinking and doing this and that? And she would literally, I'd think, she's trying to trick me here, because she goes, well, what do you think God is telling you? And I think, of course I've got to tell her the right answer. And then there were a couple circumstances where she surprised me and said, no, I think actually God does want you to go to that dance, but why? What's the reason for that? So she would surprise me by pushing me to find out for myself, not just assume that there was a right and wrong answer and that I just had to toe the line, but that life does have a lot of gray areas. It's not that there aren't right and wrong, but there's a lot of places where there's a good, better, and best, or you can turn down a path that isn't necessarily wrong, but it could lead to wrong things. So you have to be careful going down that path. So she taught me to think and not just think, not just go, okay, I don't do this, I do this, and I'm good, confess and I'm fine, whatever. She really taught me to think through the consequences of the choices I've made, and to be aware that God is working in each of us individually, and will sometimes lead, maybe my brother would go down a different path than I would, because we're two different people and there's two different situations and ways that we could be used for God's purposes in those situations. So, but my parents, I think they tried not to be legalistic, but they did try to definitely teach me, here's what God's word says, here's what Jesus said, but then here's all the examples of where Jesus in personal situations would apply that a little differently. So he would say, it's adultery to even look at a woman with lust in your heart. Not, he took it another step beyond the old Mosaic law. But then when he met with the adulteress that they brought to him and wanted him to cast stones, he actually, looked at everybody else and said, well, who's the one who without sin to cast a stone? And he told her to go and sin no more and gave her freedom. So, he was very strict on the law, but he also understood the human heart and applied that in individual situations. And I feel like that's a good thing as parents, for us to really understand our own children and their different personalities and how to respond to them. Sometimes anger is a proper response to things and they need to know the fear of the Lord. And then there's other times where they need to know the grace of the Lord. Those are both two sides of the double-edged sword of God's word. So
That is so important word for the parents out there. I love Bible characters. I like to look at them and I think, why did God, like, there's so many Bible characters. I'm hearing it. I just feel like, why did God choose this person? Because there's all different characters. They all have different personalities, and he didn't go for one size fits all. Why do you think God picked Samson? I mean, I know he gave him strength, and I don't know what was it about him he picked. Like, I just like would love to hear your take on that.
Why did God pick Samson? That's a good question.
It is a good question.
I think, the tribe of Dan was not considered one of the premier tribes of Israel. There's the 12 tribes, and Dan was not one that stood out, and that was the tribe he was from. And I think God likes to take people who cannot put the glory on their own shoulders and say, well, I'm from the tribe of Judah, and I have this and this attainment, and I have these credentials to my name. I think he likes to use the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And Samson certainly fits that. In a lot of ways, he seemed very foolish, and his story is still kind of confounding. Like, what was God doing through this man? But the story of Goliath almost overlaps Samson's. I actually wanted to play with that in the story, but we couldn't quite make it fit historically. But Goliath probably was born within 10 to 15 years of Samson's death, and so the whole story of the Israelites fighting the Philistines, from Samson all the way up through David finally slaying Goliath. To me, these are kind of different steps God was taking towards giving the Israelites freedom from the Philistine rule. And that Philistine rule was partly there because the Israelites didn't carry out God's directions when they first went into the Promised Land, and they didn't clear all the different people. They got involved in worshiping the idols of some of the locals, and so they were partly paying for some of their own mistakes in that continued oppression under the Philistines.
I think that's true too. I like to go back to what we said about mistakes, and like I think I hope that's shown in the movie. We make little mistakes that maybe we don't potty train on time, and then bigger mistakes that we go 4 and we want all the turns, and then maybe 8 we don't want to do our homework, but then as a parent, letting them make their little mistakes early and to learn from them versus make the big mistakes when they're adult. So I don't know if you could address that, because you talked a lot about he made some mistakes and his parents, we cannot step right in, but how will Samson show us that? Or not Samson, how will you address it? Making little mistakes.
Well, and definitely in Samson's story, he wanted to marry the Philistine girl, and his parents, I'm sure that, I showed in the book that they are not happy about that decision. But they let him move ahead with that. And the Bible actually says that his parents didn't know that it was of God that he would marry this Philistine girl. I think his parents knew God and were honoring him, but God had something even more subversive kind of going on behind the scenes there. But with my own children, my wife and I had talked about that when we started taking them to church when they were older, and saying, if we show up on Sunday morning or, to a service during the midweek or something, and they're not acting the way we want them to, are we going to be more worried about how they reflect on us, or are we going to be more worried about helping them grow and learn? Because sometimes it's easy as parents to get a little more of our pride involved and want them to represent us well, instead of being more concerned about what's really going on in their heart. And there's a lot of times kids are dealing with some heavy things at school or in their own personal lives, or maybe their love life has gone bad, and it's easy to discount those things when you're older. But when you're 14 years old and your boyfriend breaks up with you, that's pretty devastating. So we tried to, with our daughters, when we'd go to church, remember, we're less concerned about what people think about us. We're more concerned about them and what's going on in their hearts. And so we tried not to make them feel like you have to learn to just play the part when you show up, when you walk in the doors, to learn to put on the right happy face. But, if you're struggling, that's okay. There's no reason to take it out on others. But if you're having a bad day, let's talk about it. But we're not going to make you go and put on a big smiley face and act like everything's perfect either. So, that was just one of those things as parents we wanted to be aware of with them and talk through those kind of things and help them know that God looks more at our hearts than the outward appearance, and from within. It's easy for us to want to change people from without, to try to make them dress a certain way and look a certain way, and then hopefully they'll change inside, but it usually works the other way.
I think it's such a good point too, that your children, as parents, I'm doing this for Catholic moms, so I'm putting a lot of parenting thing. I think it's important that children know, you're going to make mistakes, and mom and dad are always here, and you're going to people may judge you, and they probably judge Samson. But the thing is, we are not going to judge you. We're going to love you unconditionally, but we're going to correct you when you're wrong. So I do appreciate it. I want to give you a chance to say some things you wanted to say about the Samson that I didn't put on the questionnaire, or what would you like to say that they would like to hear? Because I want them all to read the book and go see the movie.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you have any listeners or viewers that are writers or would like to write, but my experience is usually people that listen to these things have that dream in them at some point. So one of the fun things I had as a writer on this project was I had never tried doing a first person story where I did first person and then used other characters in third person. So in this story, one thing that I tried and I really liked the way it came out was I did all of Samson's chapters in first person. So you're in his head, you're in his thoughts, you're understanding his crazy thought processes. And I think as you read it, you'll actually realize you understand a lot more why he makes the choices he makes. And it's harder to judge him because once you're in someone else's shoes, it's harder to judge them. You realize, now I know what it feels like to be in their shoes. And so I wanted that to come across in the book, that these different choices he makes make sense with his character, the way he was thinking in his time frame. That he had motives and goals that sometimes were even good motives and goals. He just didn't always get to them the right way. And then the other characters, Delilah, I wanted to write her story a little bit, explore that without going into too much detail. I wanted it to be safe reading for a 12-year-old boy, for example. But any mother, any girl that's ever faced abuse, you're going to recognize in a few of the things that Delilah says that she was dealing with that. And she still had her choices. She could make good or bad choices. My own wife has openly talked about the fact she was abused as a kid. And she made choices that were good choices for the most part. Her mom made really good choices. I, to this day, credit her mom for getting her out of that situation. The day she found out, she got her out of that situation, which isn't always easy to do when you're, especially back in the 60s or 70s, when you were trusting a man to take care of your financial needs more than today. So I credit her mom for that. But all of these things were part of the writing process of how do I tell these different people's stories in a way that you'll relate to. And so that was a lot of fun as a writer. In terms of writing, it's not all that it's cracked up to be. I'll give you a little of the reality. This is my 17th book, but I still work at Office Depot. Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock, I'll be there unloading a truck and getting things ready for customers. So, writing can be a hobby. It can be a part-time job. It can, if you're really lucky, it can become a full-time job. But the bottom line is just to do the things that God puts in your heart and have fun with them and see where they lead. So you're doing a blog, other people can, write different things and see how people respond, and you never know where it might lead.
That's very good. That was my next question, because I'm so interested in this for the readers, that your parents were missionaries and you were formed on the Word of God and you know the Lord. What made you think of being a writer? Because you have a creative spirit, and then God called you, of course, but then what made you think, because there might be someone out there that's child is really a creative spirit, and they think, well, why can't they just be a doctor, a lawyer, Indian chief? Like, it's so unpredictable on the paycheck. You're doing it from the heart of God to teach others through, vision, because we are all, you watch something, a movie, it affects you. So what made you decide that career versus, maybe, an engineer or whatever?
Well, I did go to Bible college and, got a degree and worked at different churches. And, I've done lots of odds and end jobs, construction jobs in the summers, and worked for FedEx, I worked for Kinko's, a lot of different things along the way. So even pursuing my career choice of writing, even pursuing that, I knew that I had to be practical and pay bills because I have a wife and kids. But for me, it probably started as a kid just because I loved to read. And when we were traveling overseas, a lot of times we would be stuck in small places, either on a train or a truck or somewhere where there was just nowhere to move, and my only choice was to read a book. And so the joy and fun and imagination I got out of that as a kid, made me really want to pass that on and explore it. And then I think reading C.S. Lewis, reading J.R. Tolkien, even reading The Lord of the Flies, were these stories that had such deeper meaning behind them that it really showed me that a story can be more than just a story. It can have a lot to say. And that really challenged me as a teenager, and I started really, practically pursuing writing. My junior year of high school, my mom told me, this is back in the old days, this will tell you how old I am, but she'd say, you have the correcting ribbon in your typewriter and you keep correcting things, but you just need to finish something. So she said, why don't you take the correcting ribbon out of your typewriter and just finish a story? So between my junior and senior year of high school, the 3 months of that summer, I sat down and I wrote a 300-page book in those 3 months. And to this day, some of the pages I can't even tell where my home keys had got to because I got way off and I didn't correct it. But I did finish a book in my summertime. So, it was a sacrifice, like a lot of things are in life. To get where you want to go, you have to make sacrifices. And to be a junior in high school and sacrifice your summer to write a book was a pretty big step for me. But I think it's also when my family started believing, maybe someday he actually will be a writer. He obviously is willing to put aside some of the other things he wants to do to pursue this. So.
And I think that's important because the journey, I always say the journey takes you to destination. It's one step in front of the other. Some walk forward towards godliness, which this changes lives, the writing, and some walk backwards. So Samson, if he had had a father like you, he may have said, okay, I watch in people's eyes, the journal, like the writing does make you come alive. And for the children and moms out there, I think it's very important to not guide them towards what you want them to do, but guide them towards what they're called to do by God. So can you address that? Because there may be some moms out there that think that what does my child do? But you watch how to, like in the eyes of what, like even for your children, how to guide them what to be when they grow up. Kind of like an extra bonus question.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think it's amazing God's creativity that he's put in us. Some people are just the hardworking kind of person from the time they were a kid. You saw how they always organized their blocks in their room and wanted everything just right, and saw how things worked and fit together, and messy, but they were very creative and good with words. There's just so many types of personalities, and I don't think that's by mistake that God gives us those things. I think he wants to use the gifts he's given us, and those are going to come out in different ways. So, I think it's important not to ever make a kid feel like this is the only way that you're going to be successful in our eyes, but to be aware that God has given them different gifts and probably different talents than you have, and different personality. And usually we see just enough of ourselves in our kids that we want to mold that a little more, but to trust that God is truly their father too. And even though they have God as a father, they're still going to make mistakes, even with the best father possible out there. So to not get too hung up on those daily mistakes, but just keep directing them and encouraging them and loving them. For me, with my own daughters, I actually have written recently an article about my oldest, who had really wandered off the path to the point of almost losing her life in a situation, in a drug deal where she was in the car with another friend who was picking up some stuff. And she ended up overnight kind of turning her life back around and really giving her heart to God in a new way. And that's continued to this day. 5 years later, she's working at a church with the children and is now married and has kids, has a little girl. So, it was just a big encouragement to us that, even in the midst of what was a horrendous 2 or 3 years, I'm telling you very condensed, that during the time it felt like, God, and we've done everything wrong, and where did we go wrong, and we failed, and it was hard. So in the Samson book, I had a lot of fun writing some of the dialogue between Samson's parents, because some of it was things my wife and I would even wrestle with, where there wasn't an easy right or wrong answer of how to handle certain situations with our kids. And so Samson's mom sometimes says to the dad certain things that challenge him to rethink how he is parenting. She reminds him a number of times in the book that God is Samson's dad, and he has a father. And on the other hand, Samson's father is reminding the mom, well, Samson can't just follow his own heart because the heart's deceitfully wicked. And she's like, well, Samson he's a man of his own heart. He just needs to follow his heart. And he kind of gives her the balance of that, so they both have these parts in the story where they're challenging their son and challenging each other to know how to handle this situation. And I think God really likes it, to see a man and woman working together in that balance. I think it gives balance. It's not always easy. I'm sure there's some single parents out there watching this. And one of my daughters is a single mom right now, and she knows the struggle of that. But, I really think that's important, to have the balance as best you can for your kids, and trust God to work in them.
I think the most important thing is that we are very intrigued by the book, and I so want everyone to buy the book and see the movie. But I really want to say that I do appreciate you coming on today. And I always give someone the last word. I do radio usually. I go last words. I'll be thinking, but a character is like the main. When you develop character in a movie, we always think that's a great plus for the parents, so that they watch Samson. He's like the prodigal son, and the hardest thing for prodigal father to do, I've always heard, is to wait. The waiting is hard, and then as a parent, I think in the end of Samson's, in the Bible, I think he did turn it around. Didn't he pray? You could finish on that, because I did skim read it today, and you're probably much more a Bible scholar than me. And I think that the waiting for the child, you train them up in the way of the Lord, and when they get old, they return. Then the mix of between the dashes of train them up and then they return, it's a long battle on your knees. That's at least me. I do a lot of battling on my knees, and I do a lot of praying through the night. I'm sure your wife does as well. So would you like to address your final thoughts on the whole interview? And I do ask every person to check out Samson, the book and the movie, and thank you so kindly for doing this interview. But you get the final word if I don't talk again. I say final word, that I pop in.
I don't need the final word. You did good, but I will say, I really hope as you read the book that you can read and enjoy it yourself. Whether you're a parent finding yourself in the story and dealing with wayward children, whether you're a child who's reading it and realizing my parents have belief in what God wants to do in me, and I can learn from the mistakes of Samson, and also be encouraged by the valiant things he did and how he turned to God at the end. I just hope, and overall, you have a great time reading the book. You're encouraged by the story. There are poignant moments, there are romantic moments, there's lots of funny moments, and ultimately, it's all a part of the big tableau that God's painting out there with all of our lives, that he's not done with any of us.
Thank you so much. I do say the final though. It's not the final word. You got the final word. Women, they have to have the final word. I'm sure Delilah was that person. All who are watching, please be sure and get a copy of his book. And while you're at it, why don't you get a copy of Facing the Giants and Fireproof. Watch it as a family, and then discuss how you can implement that in your children's lives. And then I say, from me here at Catholic Mom, we appreciate you, and keep on writing. You encourage me, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Bye.
Goodbye.